Welcome to the Living Ageless and Bold podcast. Each episode, I bring you amazing women who inspire, educate, and share their experiences and journeys along the way. So grab a glass of wine or a cup of coffee, find a cozy spot, and let's relax and have some fun hearing what can be accomplished after 55. Hi, everyone. We're in for a really special treat for today's episode. Actress Gabrielle Anwar is with us today, and you will know her. She's been in over 45 television shows and films. Women our age who are watching this, most iconic for her tango scene with Al Pacino in Scent of a Woman. And most importantly, she's with us today because she was recently highlighted in Profiles in Mental Health Courage, talking about her life of dealing with bipolar disorder. So we're going to go through everything about her and hear how amazing she's doing now. So thank you so much, Gabrielle, for joining me.
Oh, it's my pleasure. Thank you for asking.
And so much to talk to you about. We only have 30 minutes. I have to start before we get into anything really deep, the Scent of a Woman, because women our age, you were what, in your 20s? And that scene is so iconic. So how does that happen? That was your breakout role. And we'll talk about how you got to Hollywood and became an actress, but it's just so iconic for all women our age.
It's a pretty magical film, I think. I love what the film conveys. And the scene was magical to shoot, so maybe we captured some of that authenticity. But I didn't expect it to be so well received because it was such a tiny role. It was, 3 scenes in a big film of just a few minutes of camera time.
Right.
So I didn't expect it to be such an impactful moment.
And it was. And this is what, 30 some years later, and it's still so incredible. And what was Al Pacino like?
He was very nice to me. He likes women.
Yeah. And for being so young and influential, I hope he was kind to you and not all these horrible stories we're hearing now in the Me Too movement.
He was very kind. He was very real and very unique. And, things were different back then. Like, men said funny things to women that weren't considered sexist and evil. And thank God, because in every sentence that I ever had with any conversation with any man in the industry, there was always some reference to our genders or gender differences.
Right. I know. I think the pendulum has swung a little too far the other way.
I agree.
We're in Virginia, and we spent a lot of time in Southwestern Virginia, and, men call you sweetie. And
right.
In a term of, it's a kind in the grocery store. It's not, hopefully we get back more into the middle.
I agree. On many, many issues.
Right. So let's talk about, and I want to talk about the book and your story. I'm so thankful to you for sharing your story in that book, because people look at you and they think, oh, she's, one of People Magazine's 50 most beautiful women at one point and this famous actress, but you're real and you live with real issues that other people live with. And by sharing what you shared, if you help, I always say this when in the podcast, if you help just one person by sharing your story, and I think you're going to help a lot more than that.
Well, I hope so. That was the intent behind participating in something so vulnerable, for want of a better word. I think, all the participants in the book have become so vulnerable with their stories, and they're heartbreaking.
And you shared a lot. So let's go back. You were a little girl. You can kind of identify when some of these things started.
Well, I think I was a little bit of a miserable child. Most of my memories are pretty morbid. Granted, I may have forgotten all the joy and have wallowed in my victimhood, but even in photo albums, and my parents have prolific memories in albums in our home, in our family home. And when I look at the pictures of me as a young child, I don't look happy. I just don't look happy. So I think...
Do you have any memories as to why you weren't happy?
Well, I was being sexually molested from the age of 4. So I don't remember much prior to being 4, which I think is pretty typical. But I have sort of a chopped up kaleidoscope of images in my memory, and that they're quite hard to tailor together and make a proper story out of, but they're explicit enough to know that that wasn't normal. Or sadly, it is rather normal, but it wasn't the right thing that a child should be experiencing.
Right. And when your parents found out, there was not a big support network there.
No. My parents, like most parents of our generation, didn't have the tools that we have now, the vocabulary that we have now, and the empathy that we have now for children who are being perpetrated in some form or other.
So how long did that go on?
With that particular man, I'm not sure when it began, so I can't say for sure how many years, but it was a significant amount of time. And then the abuse continued with other characters in my story. And
sadly, we hear that's common.
Very common. Yes, yeah. Once that door has been unlocked into the sensual soul of a child, things get turned on in that child that have no business being turned on. And it is a beacon for pedophiles.
I'm so sorry that you experienced that. And, childhood is your innocence, and that somebody could steal that from you it makes me very angry.
It's
not fair.
I've reclaimed my innocence. So I don't like to think of my perpetrators as having stolen anything from me, because I still feel innocent. And Good. I think that is something that we women lose when we lose our virginity. So, yeah, it's complicated.
So we hear from actors and actresses that often you go into those roles because you can escape. So is that what led you to acting? And I mean, obviously you were very young when you got to California, to Hollywood, to be under 21 to, star or be in that scene with Al Pacino. But what got you into that?
Well, it's kind of a situation of unfortunate circumstances that turned out to be really positive results. But I had been miserable in school, not academic, and I was failing in everything. Just, as I mentioned, not a happy child, and potentially a really bad kid could have come of my life. But I was expelled from school for being what I consider now. I was having a manic episode, and I was expelled from school shortly thereafter. And then I remember feeling, okay, something's wrong with me, because my reactions, my responses to things are so amplified that there's no gray area. It's just black and white in my mind. And I didn't think that everybody thought that way. And I started acting out at about, I would say 11, when I started my menses, which I think is really important to note, that endocrinology was off and my psychology was off, and the combination of the two blew into something much bigger, much greater than the sum of its parts.
Right. And I see this. I have a daughter. I know you have a daughter. It just, a normal, quote unquote, normal teenager, they can't control that. I remember my daughter having episodes and I'm thinking, oh my gosh. And then I realized, I'm like, she has her period. She has no idea what she's saying. This is, her hormones have really taken over. Yeah. And until you get older and realize that's what that is, and like you said,
I do liken PMS to bipolar disorder. It's exactly what it feels like, but it's exaggerated to quite a degree. But it's exactly what it feels like. You're just off. You're just not quite there in reality.
Yeah. And when we were that age, like you just mentioned, there were no phones, computer, internet, social media. You didn't know what was happening to you.
No one to ask. No. And now, of course, there's a lot of literature on the weekly cycles that we go through within the 4 weeks of the menstrual cycle. And it's fascinating to read. Each week, we're more competent in different areas and less competent in others, as opposed to feeling that week before your period that you're just incompetent, period. Excuse the pun. But yeah.
Yeah, men have no idea what we go through.
No, they don't.
No.
That's why they're so in awe of us.
As well they should be. So you're going through this, you get expelled from school, you're starting to realize something's not right, but you can't get help. What happens next?
My parents asked for the help of a psychiatrist who came to our home, and he talked to the family as a whole, and he talked to me privately. And I don't remember clearly everything that happened in that meeting, but I do remember him having me write down all the names of my family on a piece of paper. And I later discovered it was a way of diagnosing a narcissist. And if their first letter of their name, as they've written it, is much larger than the other members of their family, and you can see the hierarchy of their thinking by the size of the first letter of the name. And I remember that clearly because I remember writing it and thinking, he's going to think that I think more of myself if I make my name bigger than the others in my family. I remember having that cognitive realization that this was a trick or a medical device. But and he told my parents I was depressed, but I wasn't suffering from clinical depression. And that was a shame that he misdiagnosed me.
Now, obviously, we're most of us are familiar with bipolar and these kinds of issues. Had you ever even heard of that when you were a teenager?
No, but I had heard of manic depression because my mother, undiagnosed back in the 70s, was manically depressed. So I had heard the term and I kind of knew what it meant because my mother was the textbook example of what a manic depressive woman looks like. And so I when I learned that bipolar was the newer terminology, I just thought, well, that's more fun. Like I think of myself as a bipolar bear.
Is that hereditary? Do they know?
They don't know. They speculate that the gene is definitely there, but environmental circumstances contribute greatly to whether or not it becomes active.
So obviously you were able to curb it somewhat to start this acting career.
Well, to me, my career was mania. So everything to do with it. And I didn't look particularly manic, but the energy was all consuming. And I would get so consumed with the character that I was playing and the script that I'm reading and the dialogue that I'm learning, and it just fired all my synapses and everything was on fire. So there was never really a moment in that environment where I was depressed and low and suicidal. That was never revealed to anyone outside my very private family.
Did you go when you did a film or a show, did you have the high highs, and then when you were done, the low lows?
Pretty much. But it worked in my favor. It worked in my favor because I was becoming successful.
So were you doing movies in Europe, in England? How did your career start?
Yes, I started with a television show, a limited series, they call it now, but it was a mini series back then. And it was for the BBC, and it was a really cool character part. So I left school in my senior year, because of course you graduate high school at 16 in England. And I went to the Midlands of the country, beautiful countryside, and I shot for 6 months this show. And I was like, this is really cool. And this is really better than school. And this is really better than ballet, which is what I was hoping to become. And so then I started working consistently and never really went back to school. I did have a full ride to school, to college, but I didn't have time to go. What
were you going to major in?
I was going to major in dance, in ballet and choreography. That was my passion.
Have you had any roles where you were able to dance?
Only the tango.
Oh, really?
Well, I actually, I did a TV show here in Miami for quite a few years, and I did do a dance sequence in one of the episodes, which was really fun to do.
Do you still dance for fun?
Not enough.
Okay, so you've got the acting bug. It's helping you with your mind. And so 16, 17 years old, you keep doing that in Europe. What brought you to Hollywood, to LA?
Love. I fell in love with an American actor while I was working on another show in England. He was there shooting a horror movie, and I would see him in the canteen at lunchtime, and he would have all this horror prosthetic makeup on, but I was admiring his body. So, and then one day he and I started to talk, and then I fell head over heels in love, and he lived in Los Angeles, and I said, okay, I'm coming to live with you. And then I was literally at his home for about 5 days, and I got a call from my agent saying, can you fly to Montreal? There's a recasting, a big Warner Brothers film. So I said, sure. But I wasn't really anticipating on continuing an acting career, even though I was in the mecca of all entertainment. But I wanted to have a family. I wanted to get married and have children and have kids and wallow in that lifetime.
And did that happen with him?
In a very roundabout sort of way, it did. He and I split up, and because I had made a transgression, and my one and only, thank God it was my first and my last, but I got back together with him again after I was pregnant with a one night stand situation.
And that's your daughter?
That's my firstborn, Willow.
And you were young, early 20s?
I was 23. She was actually conceived on my 23rd birthday.
Oh my gosh. But as they say, you had a transgression that affected one part of your life, I'm sure you'd never trade anything to not have Willow with you.
No, I wouldn't trade a thing.
No. But you continued acting now.
Yes.
Even though you had the baby and your ex-boyfriend was still in your life.
Yes, he was. And he became daddy. And he still is to this very day, 30 years later, daddy. And I continued acting because I wasn't qualified to do anything else. I'd have to go back to school and start all over. So I just kept going. And I was fortunate enough, and truly I was fortunate enough to just get that big Warner Brothers film the moment I set foot in Los Angeles. It was truly God sent. And
I believe that.
Yeah.
I do. I really believe things like that happen.
Yeah, there are no coincidences,
Mm-hmm.
It's too brilliantly achieved.
Crafted, right.
Yeah. So, so I just did all sorts of crazy films in the 90s.
And how was your mental health during this time? Because having a baby can do wonders to your hormones as well.
I was the happiest I'd ever been while I was pregnant. I, for the first time, loved my body. And I had this compassion for my body, which I'd never felt.
Isn't that funny? I was the same way. Somebody who always thought, if I only lost 10 pounds, I look fat, I look this. I loved being pregnant. I could walk around the house. I just thought it was just so miraculous, creating that person inside of me.
I was in bliss.
Yeah.
I was absolutely in bliss. I understood my purpose, and it was heavenly. And I think that continued until I stopped nursing. And then I was back in the abyss.
And your partner, your ex, obviously knew. He's been living with you for some time. Was he helping you pick up pieces to take care of Willow?
Yes, but he himself had a drug and alcohol addiction. So we were pretty dysfunctional. And it wasn't working because we had a very tumultuous relationship, and the highs were off the chart and the lows were in the pit of hell for both of us. So the relationship couldn't work. It just wasn't safe. And it wasn't safe for an infant child. So I checked myself into a psychiatric hospital and was then diagnosed with bipolar disorder. So
was there a certain amount of relief, though, that there was finally something identifying it? Like
tremendous relief, but also concern that the new diagnosis was without cure.
And I read in the book, you struggled with having to take medication. And I feel a lot like you. I don't like medicine. I don't, I totally get that. And then you start to feel better and you're like, oh, great, I don't need to take it. And so.
Yeah, that's exactly how I behaved. I thought that I was flawed and that I've always been very holistic and a naturopath. So I've never been one to take, like a Advil unless I'm dying. But so I didn't want to feel flawed and put these man-made chemicals in my body that God knows what the side effects of those would be. And, I was a vegan and living off the land. I had a really wholesome existence. So I just didn't want to. And also the highs are so great. Why would I want to come down?
Right. I have a friend who talked about that, and she was like, I don't want this. Like, don't medicate me so I'm just
this, just kind of flatlining. She's like, I like the highs and she was not bipolar, but had some mental health issues where she had the high highs and the low lows, but preferred that. She didn't have the depth of the lows that you've talked about. But I understand what you're saying, because when you're medicated, you're just status quo.
Yes, it's like a lobotomy.
Yeah. So but you are now taking medication. You have found a happy place.
I have found my happy cocktail of medications, and I feel cured.
But important to tell people listening, again, if we can help one person, that didn't happen overnight.
No,
it was a process.
It didn't. It took me to my 40s to find the right dose, the right brand, the right milligram, the right daily dosage. It took me many, many years. And I was misdiagnosed so often, and I had been mismedicated so often. Even when I was first diagnosed with bipolar disorder, I was put on the wrong medications. And so it took me until I turned 40 to start really exploring something more substantial.
And will you share the story about dating who is now your husband? Because that's a pretty powerful story, and what an incredible man to stick with you through that. But started when you were dating, and the story was it the Hamptons or Nantucket?
It was in Martha's Vineyard.
Yeah.
And we were out drinking with friends, and we broke off from the group, and he and I were at a bar, and he ordered a second or third tequila a shot. And so I ordered one too. And he told me, no, you're drunk. You can't have one. And I went into this feminist rage of great proportions and said, you don't get to tell me what I do, because you're not my boss. You're not my daddy. And I just went at him. And it was the first time since we'd started dating, and we were newly dating, that he had seen this side of me. And so he got me back to the friend's house that we were staying in, this beautiful spread on the vineyard. And we were in the guest bedroom in the main house, and the master suite was right next door. And our dear friends were in the master suite when I was still poking at my husband, my boyfriend at the time. And he said something along the lines of, you were drunk, and I was just looking out for you. And I just reeled off, and I punched him as hard as I could in the face, and told him this wasn't the 1950s, and that I have every right to drink as much tequila as him. I mean, it was the most ridiculous, cliched scenario you can imagine. So then he said to me, well, since you punched me with one hand, why don't you go ahead and punch me with the other? So I reeled off and punched him with my left hand. And at that point, he started thinking, well, this relationship's over.
Right. Had you ever been violent, physical like that before?
Yes. In fact, my most manic cycles are with violence. Really aggressive, unhinged rage. And I always interpreted that as I just carry all the rage of all the women who have fought for their rights for all the centuries we've been alive. I'm like, I'm holding it all inside. I made everything very romantic.
Is there a trigger that sets you off?
Yes, there's always a trigger. But it could be something so ridiculously minimal that it doesn't seem like a trigger. And maybe it isn't a trigger. Maybe I'm just thinking that it's a trigger.
Right. So it's not something you can identify. It just click and it happens.
It usually comes from a place that's going to affect my ego. So lack of respect is a trigger. or someone doubting me is a trigger. So it's got a lot to do with my ego.
You're right.
Protecting me.
Right.
In its narcissistic way.
But you're getting a handle on this now. I knew 30 minutes with you was going to go so quickly, but can you tell the quote unquote fairy tale ending, or where you are now? So you punched him in the face, but ... Cut to many years later, I am with my whole mate. So I think we have role mates, and then we have soulmates, and then if we're lucky, we have whole mates. And I'm with my whole mate. And I can't say we're going to be in this bliss forever. Who knows? I can't say that. I couldn't even say that on my wedding day, you know, but I'm in it. I'm in it. And I'm wholeheartedly in it without reservation. And it sounds like he's wholeheartedly in it without reservation, which is what makes him your whole mate.
Exactly.
So I wrap up every episode. I ask my guests the same 2 questions. What is the greatest thing you've accomplished since you turned 50?
Becoming a grandmother.
I have to be careful because if my kids listen to this, but I can't wait. So that's wonderful. Congratulations.
Thank you. Thank you so much.
And then where do you see yourself in 10 years?
Oh, closer to the prize.
What's the prize?
I guess elevation. I just want to keep rising.
I love that. But you're in a good place now, are you?
Yes, I'm in the best place I've ever been. I'm happier than I've ever been. I wish there was more of me so that I can be in more places and accomplish more things and see my children more regularly.
Yeah, but it must feel so good to know that when you do see them and talk to them, that you're healthy now and in a good place and in a good place for your first grandchild.
Yeah. Well, that's what my daughter and I marvel over currently, is that we're really in a good place between us for the first time in many, many years, maybe ever.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
And your journey, like I said, if anyone is listening, get help. There can be
get the right help. Yeah.
Yeah. And the book is very powerful. And again, thank you for being willing to do that with him and share your journey and coming on here and sharing with us too. I really appreciate you.
Thank you. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for listening or for watching this episode of Living Ageless and Bold. If you haven't already, please make sure you hit subscribe. And if you like the episode, I hope that you will give us a great review. You can also head over to livingagelessandbold.com and sign up for information, inspiration, and exclusive opportunities for us, women over 55. Thanks for listening. And remember, no matter what you do, keep living ageless and bold.